following is a message at Living Savior Church in Asheville and Hendersonville, North Carolina. To learn more, go to lsavior.org.
King. He was the last of the English kings to die in battle, King Richard III. He died in 1485, and it seemed like he was buried in haste. Some speculate that the soldiers who had taken over forced the friars to bury him in a shallow grave. Of all the legends as to where his body could be found, all of those circulated, and many of them were just that, legends and lies, none of them true. Soon after his burial in 1485, his grave was lost. A king's grave? Really? Lost? As the archaeologists found his grave well over 500 years later, only in 2012, mind you, only in 2012 did they finally find his grave. They found out some of the details. They also found out some interesting tidbits that in the 1800s, they had built unknowingly an outhouse over him. I mean, so think about this. You get word that your great-great-granddaddy's got a grave and somebody wants to put a porta-john over the top, and your number one reaction would be what? Cool, no big deal. No, I mean, they didn't know, but still, an outhouse over the grave of a king? And then in the early 1900s, they demoed the outhouse and put a garage for housing coal, unknowingly. Thankfully, they went over the top because the grave was quite shallow, and had they dug deep, they probably wouldn't have even noticed, and it would have ruined the ruins. So when the archaeologists finally found him, they found out of all the things that we can't say, they found out that it was shallow, that it was probably done in haste, that he was kind of condensed, that the shape of it was different than the average person. All of this was not really fitting or appropriate for the average person, much worse to do such a thing for a king. A hasty burial, unfitting for a king. Sound familiar? So not many people accepted Jesus as king. Yeah, there's a little bit of irony that when Governor Pilate posted a sign over Jesus' head on the cross, it said what? King of the Jews, much to the dismay of the Jews who wanted him to take it down. He said, what I've written, and okay, onward it goes. You see, they didn't accept him as a king. They're the ones who had hatched this plot to kill him. Nevertheless, they couldn't deny that he certainly was a type of king who was so out of this world. They couldn't refute his message. I mean, to have so many people following him, to say he was trending is an understatement. There are so many people who gravitated to this new type of message. They couldn't stand this legalistic bludgeoning of the current Pharisees of the day, and Jesus was sharing a message of forgiveness and peace with God. Repentance actually makes you right with God, not on account of what you do, but on account of his mercy? No way. They couldn't refute his message. They couldn't deny the miracles. I mean, what do you say when a guy you knew was blind his whole life, and you've known him, all of a sudden sees? The lame walk. He feeds thousands from almost nothing. The deaf hear. Even the dead are raised. But you know what the enemy's response to that was? You know what? We hate this guy so much. How about we kill the last guy that he raised from the dead, Lazarus, not that long ago? That's how bad the hatred was. So their plot was hatched, and they captured him, wrongly convicted him, and he died. Certainly not the death of a king, as he died by execution on a Roman cross and hastily buried before all of the necessary resting and preparations for the Sabbath day. Joseph of Arimathea, a rich follower, buries him in his own tombs, carved out a stone, puts a stone in front of it. The women watch the whole thing happen. If you read the end of chapter 27 in Matthew, they watch the whole thing happen. His enemies think, well, they're going to steal his body and just pretend like, he's risen from the dead. This is going to be worse. So they put a Roman guard and they put a seal on the stone, and Romans kind of know how to get things done and also to stop things from happening. That's kind of why there was this thing called the Roman Empire. So they put a guard in the way. What's going to get beyond that? The women, they wake up early that Easter morning, and what are they thinking about? This guy wasn't buried properly. Even worse than Richard III, he's thrown into this tomb and he's kind of wrapped up. They saw the whole thing happen, and it didn't meet their custom and their standards, because back then there needed to be spices and special wrappings, and they watched what didn't happen, and they're already prepping on Easter morning. So what are they thinking about as God invites us in his word to walk with these women to the tomb? What do you think? What do you see? What do you imagine you overhear? Did you bring the spices? The certain quantity? Women who are all preparing to do the same thing, have you ever overheard them before? 2 cups, right? Not 1.5. I'm kidding. Kind of. The wrapping, the right wrapping. Did you bring the right amount? Okay, we got it. And all of this talk about what? Spices and customs and the pragmatism of it all, the procedure of it all. And all of that is what? It's all a distraction from the real thing at hand, which is grief, the death of a loved one. I've seen it hundreds of times, and maybe some of you have too. You know, around a funeral. Pastor, are you going to do that? And somebody shows up with a long list, and I sit there and I smile and I nod. Because some of it's been some of you. You have the long list of things you got to get ready for the service and the flowers, and what about the snacks afterwards, and what kind of coffee? You're going to make sure it's good coffee, not that Folgers. Okay, we're onward. And then the cookies and the snacks, and who's going to cater it in, and then we're going to talk to the funeral home and all of these, and who's going to take care of this, and who's going to write the obituary, and all of those things are fine and good. And what are all those things doing? It seems like that's the hard stuff, right? No. That's actually the easy stuff. You know what the hard thing is? When you're face to face with the death of a loved one, the hard thing is actually to do nothing. Because then you are quiet and you are alone with yourself and whatever it is that you believe about the death of that loved one. Because the world doesn't have a solution, and you on your own and I on my own just so happen to not have a solution either. That's what's bothering those women. That's what bothers us all. And if that's not bad enough, it's not only the death of a loved one. When these women are walking to the tomb, I mean, how could they not think about the walk that they're going to have to that dead-end road someday too for their own grave? I mean, I think about that. Like, so what? What really moves the needle in my life? What really affects people or myself or my loved ones? Like, what actually does it in the end if at the end of it, the stone rolls in front and then it's just another one of those graves that's never going to be resurrected? I can promise you, it's not in the cards of me like it was for Richard III, that someday my tomb is going to be lost and there's going to be some archaeologists who are going to wonder, where's Caleb Kurbis buried? 500 years from now, we really should find out where that guy's buried. No! Guess who's going to care 500 years from now? Not some archaeologists, probably little to nobody. That's not just me being grim, it's just me being real and honest. I'm not a king, certainly not the king of England. Like, it's just not in the cards. So you get to the end of that long dead end, and then what? That's what's bothering the women. That's what bothers me. That's maybe what bothers you. And so what do they aim to find? They aim to find what? Not just some remains that have been hastily buried like those people who found the bones of Richard III, but they find what? As they think about the stone and how they're going to roll it away, they find that the stone has already been rolled away. And what they think they're going to find that's going to be the object of their desire and help them redirect all of their distractions and frustrations, all of those distractions and frustrations, ironically, are the thing that meet the dead-end road. Because all of those distractions and frustrations are centered upon the fact that there is death to deal with to begin with. But if death is defeated and it's no longer there, then what about all those distractions and frustrations? What about all those fears and worries? What about the agony and the grief of a loved one who's no longer there? What about the fear of gazing into your own grave someday too? All of it is gone because they look into the tomb and shock above all shocks, they see that Christ is not there. He was raised. And to prove it, he sent one of his messengers. Isn't that fascinating, by the way, that the earth shakes and all the things that we find to be so solid in our life are actually the things themselves that are moved. God shakes the ground that we think is so solid beneath our feet. That's what God thinks about the stuff like that. Stones that stand in our way. I'm going to send some angels to kind of roll this away like it's a kiddie toy. And they sit on it just to prove how little this thing is, the things that we care about. And all the while, what happens? They look in and they see the source of all of their fears, worries, and griefs is empty. Because that's what a grave is. The source of all of our fears, worries, and griefs. Empty. And what does the angel say? He's not here. He's risen, just as he said. Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Alleluia. And that means when you look at the grave of a loved one, that has everything to do with today, tomorrow, and every day until God calls you home. That means when you look at your own grave, that has everything to do with how you face death. You and I do not go looking for graves so we can find a sense of closure, a half-baked cheap kind of peace. We do not go looking at graves so we can only remember, cry a little bit, get it out of our system, and move on. The idea of a grave for us is not an end. It is only the beginning. It is not a door closed. It is the threshold we cross. It is not something that is meant to be an exclamation point at the end of your life. It is an ellipse before we face eternal life. This is what Easter is about. Easter is not some sunset on a dreary day and then it's it into everlasting night. When the Son of God rose, the sun set on death so you would only face life. Easter is not just a day where through food and music and Easter lilies and pastel colors, we make ourselves feel good, especially on account of all the bad times, so we can compensate, No, Easter is the end of all bad because there's nothing worse than death. It's the source of all bad after all. But Easter is where death goes to die. And that's the only thing that stays in the grave is death as Jesus walks out, and not only for him, but also for you. Easter is not one of those times where we follow people, just like us, who go down this long road only to meet a dead end. Easter is the end of all dead ends, ironically speaking. And it is the new birth into a living hope that God gives you now and forever. That is what God gives you. So you can look at the grave of your father or your mother, your child, your spouse, a friend, your grandparents, a neighbor. You can gaze into that grave, and yes, you can be filled with grief. That is normal. That's normal. But we don't grieve like the rest of people who have no hope, because Jesus died and rose. And so God will take with Jesus all who just fall asleep in him, because that's all that death is to the one who squashed it under his feet when he catapulted out of that grave. And he didn't just do that for himself, but he does that for you too. Think of the guarantee that gives you as you look at the loved ones whom you miss. You get them back. You didn't have a last hug. You didn't shake their hand one last time. You didn't see them and then that was over. That's not the end. That's what Jesus' resurrection gives you. It's just the beginning. And for some of you, this might seem like really hard to wrap your brain around because this just sounds so opposite from the rest of the world. It is. It is. Because what does the world have to say? Buck up and maybe you'll feel better tomorrow? That's the summary statement, right? But with all of the skepticism and doubts that we may have, consider what the angels are very clear in saying. He has been raised from the grave just as he said. He called his shot. How many people do you know in all of world history not only fulfilled promises that are hundreds and thousands of years old, verifiably, but then said that they were going to die by cross, and then not only said that they would rise again, but on the right day they rose again? And do you know anybody that came back to life? Know anybody that came back on the day they said? Because if you do, then we got a whole new game changer here. But there isn't, and there won't be, except for Jesus who did, which verifies absolutely everything that he says. So unless there's another guy who can do it, which there isn't, then we listen to what he says. And that doesn't just give us Easter joy, that gives us Easter confidence and certainty. I mean, even if you're wrestling with this in a way that really tugs at your doubt strings, yes, there's such a thing. Consider who the first eyewitnesses are. They're women. Did you know that back then, a woman's testimony would not be held up in a court of law? I'm not saying that's cool. I'm just saying that's the way it was. So if you were writing the story, if you were the author of the story, as these guys were, do you think that the first eyewitnesses would be women? If you wanted people to believe it, do you think you'd be like, yeah, then the women went to the tomb? Because everybody believes women back then. No, you wouldn't have done that at all. So then the question you have to wrestle with is, then why does everyone believe it? Then why do even the disciples who don't want to believe it and are scared suddenly have a change of heart and do believe it and are filled with confidence and they're willing to die for the dude? Why is it that even as you heard in the epistle reading from 1 Corinthians 15, that there are hundreds of people who deny it and then all of a sudden believe it? This is but the beginning of all of the overwhelming evidence, yes, evidence, empirically speaking, for the resurrection, which leads us to say, if there had never been a resurrection, we would never know of a guy named Jesus to begin with. But the fact that everyone does, and the fact that you and I know what that means, It doesn't just fill us with some confidence, certainly not arrogance, but humble faith as we look at the tombs of loved ones and we even look at our own. And there's more. Looking for graves nowadays is quite a lot easier than it was 500 years ago. Certainly if they're looking for a lost grave like that of a lost king, you're going to need to bring in some archaeologists and some historians and make sure we get the right place before we dig. It's kind of a pretty serious matter. Call first before you dig. But if you go to findagrave.com, millions and millions of graves you can find. You want to look for William Shakespeare? Westminster Abbey. You want to look for Walt Disney? He's in some memorial park in LA. You can find he's one of the most popular searches, no surprise. I've never been to my grandpa Kurbis's grave in North Shore Memory Gardens in St. Joseph, Michigan. But I entered Norman Kurbis, and then I entered the year that he died. Sure enough, Google Maps, 2023 mechanism, I could see. How cool is that? Finding a grave is quite easy. The women didn't need any of that. They didn't want any of that. They had to do it the old-fashioned way. We got to go see with our own eyes, similar to what we do after a funeral. When the procession leaves and even hops in cars and follows the blue flickering light all the way to the grave so we can see it with our own eyes when that person goes into the ground. They wanted to see. And yet, when they found out that he wasn't there, what is going on inside of them? There's a stirring, this crazy cocktail of what? Fear and joy, Matthew says. Fear and joy is now what? They're sent to go tell the disciples. God sends his messengers to go tell the disciples. But he wants to make sure that the women know exactly what to say to the disciples. And so that's why Jesus meets the women along the way. And what happens? What does he tell the women to call the disciples? You see, when they were first called, they were followers. That's really what the word disciple means. I will make you fishers of men. You're going to be like sheep following a shepherd. They're just going to follow him. And at times it's hard to follow a Savior. And we know what it's like when we doubt the things that he says and we trust the certainty of the scriptures, yes. And boy, did they prove that. He doesn't call them followers, though. He could have called them friends. The last time they saw Jesus, they were in the upper room and he washed their feet. You might think that's gross, that's fine, but that's a very humble, serving sacrifice that he provided for them to call them friends and to demonstrate his love for them before he eternally fed them, as he does us, with his supper. But he doesn't call them friends. And it's not just because they didn't act like friends the last time that they saw him and he them, because they deserted him. And maybe we can identify with them there too, as we don't always carry forth the name of Jesus as we should either. You know what he doesn't say to the women? How about you tell those backstabbers, I'm coming. Oh, it's like the worst, wait till your dad gets home. He doesn't tell them, hey, remember those guys those so-called friends? He doesn't use like passive-aggressive sarcasm, that special mixture that you use when you want to smile when you stab someone, like poke them. He doesn't do any of that either. What does he call them? Go tell my brothers. Go tell my brothers and my sisters. Because Jesus rose from the grave, he does not look at you with a rap sheet to remind you of all the things you've done wrong in your life. He went to the grave to pay for your sin. That's why he endured hell there, so that your sin will never follow you, and it would never be part of your identity before God as he looks at you. He does not look at you and want to remind you of your guilt. He does not want to take your regrets and shove it in your face. He does not want to take your mistakes and make you remember them more than his mercy. It's the opposite. He chooses to forget. And the way he can is the fact of the resurrection. In fact, the resurrection is proof that all of your guilt is gone. Every mistake is flooded with mercy. All of your sin, you're saved from it. And every failure only is overwhelmed with God's forever kind of forgiveness. That's what the resurrection gives to you. And that doesn't just affect you on Easter Sunday. That affects you tomorrow. That affects you 3 days from now when you wonder the type of person who you really are. And maybe God through his word gets to whisper, maybe even shout and remind you that you're eternally loved and forgiven. That really helps you when you look at your spouse. And does anyone know you any better, including your lumps? And of the greatest things that you get to remind yourself, and yes, your spouse, is that you're forgiven in the resurrected Christ? When you look at your children, what greater thing could you tell your children than that they have a Father who's greater than you, who loves them and raised his Son so that they would be his children? Children, you get to look at your parents, and there's no greater thing you could tell your parents than I forgive you and I love you. That's what the resurrection means. It is the bedrock not just of our eternity, it is the foundation of how we live our lives even here and now. You know, if you were to go to findagrave.com and were to look for Jesus, you didn't have to go to findagrave.com, but you could find the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem is the traditional spot. All the stones and rocks have been chiseled away if people have used it for relics, thinking that it has some magical, spiritual, medicinal power to help them. You know what? I don't care. I've walked through the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and you know what my thought was? Cool. You built a giant church over it. Around here somewhere, Jesus was buried. I kind of felt bad for a little bit. I had to talk to one of my brothers. Like, I kind of don't care. Does that make me a bad Christian? Here I am, second year training at the seminary, and I'm talking to fellow seminarians like, anyone else not really give a rip about this? Like, do I need to quit and learn how to be a plumber? And two of my classmates said, I'm with you, in a sense. I mean, we appreciate the history, of course, and respect, yes. But who cares? There's no tomb, because he ain't there. Instead, he didn't rise so that we would just remember a specific place, much less an empty one. He rose so that he would live and reign on high and even in your hearts now. So that is the place where we look. We look to his word, which reminds us of all of his promises made and kept. We look to his word, especially when we need confidence as we're experiencing grief over a loved one or fear over our own tomb too. We look to his word, and there we find the confidence to face tomorrow and the next day and the forever of days. For when there's that final sunset on you or this world, whichever comes first, God promises you that that is just the threshold for the eternal sunrise of heaven. That is what God has given you. Look nowhere else than the empty tomb. For Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Hallelujah.